So my name is Allison Raniker, and I am the curator at the Christian Petersen Art Museum with University Museums at Iowa State University. We have the pleasure of welcoming Joni Kinsey for her lecture in conjunction with the latest exhibition at the Petersen Art Museum titled Artists of an Era, A New Deal, Iowa Artists and Iowa State College, which is on view through December 20th. Joni Kinsey received her Ph.D. from Washington University in St. Louis in 1989 and joined the University of Iowa faculty in 1991. She is recently retired from the University of Iowa, where she taught American art history for over 30 years, including courses on American regionalist art, American landscape painting, American prints, art of the national parks, and museum theory and practice. She specializes in the history of landscape art, especially of the American West and Midwest, Grant Wood and regionalism, and American popular prints. She is the author of 4 books: Thomas Moran and the Surveying of the American West from the Smithsonian, Plain Pictures, Images of the American Prairie from the Smithsonian, The Majestic Grand Canyon, 150 Years in Art from First Glance Books, and Thomas Moran's West, Chromolithography, High Art, and Popular Taste, and numerous articles and book chapters. In 2014, Kinsey was a Fulbright Fellow in the UK, researching a project entitled Thomas Moran's Britain, Transatlantic Visions of the American Turner. She is currently on the National Advisory Board for the Grant Wood Art Colony at the University of Iowa. And thank you. And without further ado, here is Dr. Joni Kinsey.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And I'm going to share my screen here and we will get started. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. The exhibition, Artists of an Era, A New Deal, Iowa Artists and Iowa State College, celebrates the history of art at what is now Iowa State University and the remarkable synergy of art, science, engineering, agriculture, home economics, and Iowa culture that distinguishes the campus. The emphasis on the arts there were energetically developed in the 1930s and 1940s, an era of hardship, when investment in things deemed non-essential could hardly be expected, especially at an institution dedicated to the more practical issues of agriculture and technology. During the most difficult years of the Great Depression, the college was unusually active and innovative, commissioning major public murals and sculptures, acquiring an array of smaller works of art, establishing an artist in residency program, hosting exhibitions, and engaging with a wide array of local, state, and national arts organizations. All of this transformed both the university and the state of Iowa, leaving a legacy that is alive and well today. Iowa State's dedication to the founding era of its arts programs is significant and surpasses almost all the other institutions in the state, including the University of Iowa, where art has been taught since the 1880s. The current exhibition is just one among many that the ISU museums have developed on the topic in recent years, along with numerous publications on Iowa arts that have contributed important scholarship to the field of American visual culture. I'm especially indebted to the scholars of these projects, notably Lynette Pullman, Director and Chief Curator of Iowa State's University Museums, and Curator Allison Raniger, who you just met. And I want to thank them for inviting me to speak today. I also want to acknowledge especially the research of Dr. Leah Rawson DeLong, an independent scholar who has worked closely with the ISU museums for many years and whose publications I have drawn on for many aspects of this presentation. Their work is exemplary and deserves special and significant recognition. The works of art in Artists of an Era are varied and include drawings, finished paintings, sculptures, and portraits of key individuals who contributed to the growth of the arts at Iowa State in the 1930s. These objects, combined with permanent installations of major murals and sculptures elsewhere on campus, offer remarkable insights into a period of visionary creativity during a time of crisis, one that fostered a cultural touchstone in the state of Iowa. The principal catalyst for these developments was Raymond M. Hughes, who became president of Iowa State College, as it was then called, in 1927. Born in Iowa and educated as a chemist and physicist at Miami University in Ohio, where he later taught and was college president, and with a master's degree from MIT, Hughes had an unusual devotion to the arts, especially for the president of an agricultural and mechanical college in a farm state. He persistently spoke and wrote about the importance of the arts, saying in 1934, for example, in a speech entitled The Appeal of the Beautiful, he said, "It is not only proper but highly desirable that we do all we can to develop the appreciation of the beautiful." And he pursued that ideal energetically throughout his tenure. Almost immediately after becoming president of Iowa State, Hughes arranged for the college to join the American Federation of Arts, which was funded by the Carnegie Foundation, and he established a college art committee, which began strategizing how to acquire art for the campus, sponsor exhibitions and lectures, create courses in design and art history, and as well, of course, find funding for these. The advent of the Great Depression in the late 1929 brought severe budget cutbacks, but Hughes and his committee persisted, asserting that even modest amounts would yield, quote, to a high return in the improvement of the artistic appreciation of the people of Iowa. They successfully applied for small grants from the Carnegie Foundation for art reproductions to hang in campus buildings and slides and prints for a course on art appreciation that was astonishingly required for senior engineering students beginning in 1935. But at the same time, records make clear that Hughes dipped into his own pocket on numerous occasions to help ensure the development of art that he believed could benefit his college and the people of Iowa. This dedication testifies not only to his aesthetic commitment, but also, and maybe even more importantly, his respect for the farmers and engineers of his state and his belief that they had and as a profound a capacity and as deep a hunger for the beautiful as any other American, including those of the genteel classes. Hughes and his cause had important allies. In 1928, for example, both the Carnegie Foundation and the American Federation of Arts provided a $50,000 grant to establish a municipal arts center in Cedar Rapids called the Little Gallery. And its Harvard-educated director, Edward Rowan, who had known Hughes since his student days at Miami University, became an important partner in Iowa State's development. Together, the two men arranged for exhibitions from both the AFA and the Little Gallery to be displayed at the Ames campus, and eventually Rowan became a very important figure in facilitating federal support for what is now the artistic crown jewel at Iowa State, the monumental mural cycle, When Tillage Begins, Other Arts Follows, in Parks Library. These paintings are the premier works of art at Iowa State, and many of the objects in Artists of an Era in the exhibition have ties to them in one way or another. The title of the murals originated in an 1840 speech by Daniel Webster, and the phrase significantly continues with the declaration that the farmers, therefore, are the founders of human civilization. This assertion not only underscores the agricultural mission of Iowa State College and more generally the importance of the people of Iowa, but it also perfectly embodies the ideology behind Raymond Hughes's vision for integrating arts and other cultures, sciences, engineering, etc., into campus. The murals begin in the original entrance hall on the library's first floor with a three-part scene entitled Breaking the Prairie, which portrays when tillage begins, the clearing and plowing of the land, notably with a John Deere plow, which was a Midwestern invention. The other murals continue up the large staircase, filling three large walls with scenes of other arts that follow that beginning, specifically the agricultural, technical, and domestic arts. An additional group of murals depicting the literary, performing, and visual arts was planned for the large reading room at the top of the stairs, but those were never realized. Even without that final section, the spectacular murals are a landmark work of art. Not only do they vividly represent subjects central to Iowa State College and exemplify Hughes's vision for the integration of the fine and practical arts, they were also designed by the state's most important artist, Grant Wood, and they were some of the earliest works produced under the auspices of the new federal arts programs of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, a wide-ranging effort to put Americans back to work during the darkest days of the Depression. These murals are a major national monument, not just a point of local pride. And here is the grouping of the three walls, and we'll be seeing those again. President Roosevelt was inaugurated in March of 1933. This was before January became the month of presidential inaugurations. Already by May, his administration was launching relief programs for American workers. By November of 33, the Civil Works Administration was implemented. This was the predecessor of the better-known WPA, or Works Progress Administration. Every state in the CWA and later the WPA was provided with funding, and a local artist was hired to direct art projects for public buildings. Iowa's director was Grant Wood, and the most important project among several he supervised for the PWAP was the mural series for Iowa State College. These murals are widely acknowledged as among the most important images produced by the Public Works of Art project in the United States. But less well known is the fact that Iowa State was planning them before the inauguration of the federal program. President Raymond Hughes contacted Grant Wood about designing murals for the campus at least as early as November of 1933, and the project was ready for approval and implementation when the PWAP was inaugurated on December 8th. Conveniently, funding was virtually assured since Edward Rowan, friend to both Hughes and Wood, was hired as assistant director of the PWAP in Washington, and the Civil Works Administration that oversaw that program was led by Harry Hopkins, a native Iowan and graduate of Grinnell College. It was rather a cozy arrangement, but it is important to recognize that the project originated with Hughes and his vision to develop the arts at Iowa State. Hughes could have known of Grant Wood in several ways. Rowan could have introduced them, since he and Wood had interacted regularly in Cedar Rapids since the late 1920s, as Wood was emerging there as a local and very significant artist. Hughes could also not have missed hearing about Wood's painting, American Gothic, that captivated the country in 1930, appearing in newspapers across the country as the latest sensation in American art. Hughes himself wrote that Wood had been suggested to him by another person, Paul Douglas, a noted economics professor at the University of Chicago. But Iowa State's president had an even closer connection in two members of his college art committee, Joanna Hanson and Zenobia Ness. Both were on the faculty of the Home Economics Department and the Applied Arts program. Each was a trained artist, having both attended the School of Fine and Applied Art in New York and the Art Students League, also in New York. Hanson also had a diploma from Pratt Art Institute and a degree from Iowa State, and Ness had taken courses at the University of Chicago. I want to pause here to say that the exhibition, Artists of an Era, includes a nice watercolor that you see here by Hanson called Brick House Row, but unfortunately, there's nothing by Ness, whose art remains virtually unknown. Until recently, portraits of the two women have been limited to black and white photographs, but the University Museums at Iowa State has just commissioned this lovely portrait of Zenobia Ness, which you see there on the lower right. And that's by Rose Franson, an Iowa artist, and it is in the current exhibition. Both of these accomplished women knew Grant Wood quite well. Hanson had attended the 1932 Stone City Art Colony in Anamosa, Iowa, that Wood had directed, and Ness had become friends with him through her work as supervisor of the Iowa State Fair Art Salon, where his paintings had been taking top prizes since 1929. But regardless of how Hughes learned of Wood and his potential to enhance the arts at Iowa State, it is clear that there were already strong connections that paved the way for the Big Mural Commission. Once the PWAP was inaugurated and the Iowa project approved, work progressed rapidly. Wood's designs were ready, and he had quickly hired some 44 Iowa artists to execute the large paintings, as well as other kinds of art, including sculpture and easel painting. Work began in earnest in January of 1934 with the murals done on canvas, not in Ames, but rather at the University of Iowa in Iowa City in a hastily constructed studio made out of an unused swimming pool. And if you look closely at this photograph, you can see the way you enter the pool, the tile on the walls, and they built a floor so that they could erect scaffolding for the painting. And as the caption indicates, here is Grant Wood in the lower right, and we don't know for sure. It's possible that this is Zenobia Ness and maybe even Raymond Hughes. If you have other insights into the identity of those, a lot of us would like to know who you think that might be. As an added bonus there at the University of Iowa, the university hired Wood as a mural painting professor, and and the PWAP artists received both their federal paychecks and course credit for doing this work. The PWAP lasted only a few months and closed in late April 1934, but funding was assembled from Iowa State College, the University of Iowa, which was then called the State University of Iowa, the SUI, State University of Iowa, and the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the federal government's money, to complete the project. Before the entire mural for Iowa State College was finished, and to celebrate the achievements of the national PWAP project, 3 panels from the agriculture section were shipped to Washington for display at the Department of Agriculture in DC, where they were admired by Iowan and Secretary of Agriculture Henry A. Wallace. And then they went on to a significant exhibition at the Corcoran Museum of Gallery or Museum of Art across from the White House. This was a major event of over 1,600 works of art from across the country, and the Iowa mural had pride of place on the main staircase. Widely admired in the press, the paintings were especially singled out by New York Times art critic Edward Jewell, who said, and you see that in the clipping on the upper left, "Here we have, noble alike in sentiment and presentation, a portrait of rural America." And he goes on. The staircase murals, and here they are again, were installed at Iowa State 5 months later in October 1934. And so let's pause to look at these. We're looking now here at the agricultural panels, and you can see down below each one, this one says veterinary medicine, this says farm crops and animal husbandry. This is the panel on your right as you walk up the staircase towards the top level. We're kind of looking at it backwards in a way. Here in the middle panel that flanks the window and the title, "When Tillage Begin, Other Arts Follow," we have the domestic arts, sewing and housekeeping and childcare. And this certainly was a major preoccupation of the home economics department there at Iowa State, also known as domestic science, of course. And as we just saw, Joanne Hansen and Zenobia Ness were professors in that department, and the Allied Arts program was located in the home economics department. So this featuring of women and their science work, in a sense, is really an important part of this project. On the right are the engineering sections, and here you see ceramic engineering, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, and aeronautical and civil engineering over on the right. It's really an innovative use of space with a kind of implied additional story with these sections that elevate a second grouping on top. And each of the 3 walls has a large central section that really kind of anchors. Here it's a window, and here it's this section that sort of transcends the 2 levels. So it's an interesting design, and certainly Grant Wood's vision was carried out in extraordinary fashion. Downstairs, the When Tillage Begins, Breaking the Prairie installation, this was actually not finished and installed until 1937. So this is the first part of the phrase, the title, When Tillage Begins, and this is the beginning of that. But at the same time, this is the last of the murals to be produced. In 1934, as the staircase murals were installed, just as they were celebrating this new achievement, it was clear in the national press that the Midwestern artists and their patrons were onto something big. Time magazine, for example, in December, just a month or so, a couple months after the installation of those murals, featured Missouri painter Thomas Hart Benton on its cover, which was a first for an American artist to be so honored. And the story inside included photographs of Grant Wood and Kansas painter John Stuart Curry, and also text that celebrated the work they were doing to bring America's heartland to the forefront of American art. The Iowa State murals were clearly on the cutting edge, and the nation was learning about the importance of cultural development in the region. But the Parks Library murals were not the only projects of the Iowa PWAP. Murals were begun but never completed for the Des Moines Public Library, but a variety of easel paintings and sculptures were accomplished, including a large statue of Sac and Fox Chief Black Hawk by Harry Stimson, which remains on public view today in Lakeview, Iowa, and here you see that. And another sculptor was Christian Petersen. He already had a long and distinguished record of public and private sculptures in other states and had been working in Iowa since 1929, giving lectures for the Des Moines Women's Club and creating portraits of Meskwaki leaders for the Iowa Historical and Memorial Department, which is the original name for the State Historical Society. The director of that society, Edgar Harlan, actually was the one to introduce Petersen to Raymond Hughes in 1932, and Hughes commissioned him to do a large fountain for the dairy industry building at Iowa State in the summer of 1933. When the PWAP was initiated that fall, Hughes arranged for his inclusion in the project, and Petersen spent much of his time with the team in Iowa City, refining his designs for the fountain and making several sculpted busts of his colleagues, some of which are in the exhibition. Artists of an Era. Here we see, for example, the heads of John Pusey, who primarily worked on the Des Moines Library designs, and Francis McCrae, who was a principal painter of the Iowa State murals, especially Breaking the Prairie, which he supervised almost entirely. Another bust is of Bertrand Adams, who was responsible for the lettering on the Ames murals and the detailed mechanical forms of the engineering panels. Adams is also represented in the exhibition by two paintings, Squabs in the Squall and Lost Chick, both recognized with honorable mention awards at the Iowa State Fair Art Salon just after the PWAP project came to a close. After the end of his federal funding, Christian Petersen moved to Ames in October 1934, when Hughes arranged for him to become the college's first artist in residence, and he immediately embarked on the completion of the history of dairying for the dairy industry building. These had been planned to be cast in bronze, but for financial reasons, they would now be done in ceramic. Working closely with Paul Cox, the head of ceramic engineering, in a quintessential example of the integration of the arts and sciences, the manufacturing of the panels required significant technical refinements since they were too large for the campus kilns. Each relief had to be divided into 9 sections, and later, as you see here in the center, other sculptures by Petersen similarly had to be broken down to fit into the kiln and then would be reassembled. For the dairy building reliefs, they divided them into 9 sections and fired them separately and then reassembled them in the permanent installation. The divisions between the panels in their final form gives the whole a distinctive effect of mosaic, which I think enhances their effectiveness. And within the secluded courtyard, they offer an important focal point and a visual embodiment of the agricultural sciences conducted within the surrounding building. Petersen would go on to create a wide array of sculptures for the campus, and throughout his 20-year tenure at Iowa State, he did many, many different things, including a bust of the head of the dairy department, Martin Mortensen, which is included in Artists of an Era alongside his painted portrait. And Petersen also taught sculpture for many years in the developing Allied Arts program. In addition to the current exhibition, Artists of an Era in the Christian Petersen Museum in Morrill Hall at Iowa State, I want to also recommend a small exhibition currently on view in the same building of the work of Petersen's students, including Norma Lyons, who you see on the lower right, who was hardly the first butter sculptor at the Iowa State Fair, but one of the most famous because of her nearly half-century of creations for the popular exhibit. The Iowa State Fair's Art Salon played a very important role in the growth of the arts at Iowa State College from the early days of the Hughes administration, especially since Zenobia Ness, instructor of home economics and applied arts, was the supervisor of the art exhibitions at the fair from 1927 to 1939. Notably, she enabled the entry of the budding regionalist artists from Iowa, such as Grant Wood and Marvin Cohn, into the shows, a progressive step in an era when their work was considered too modern by conservatives who were influenced by traditionalist tastes, led by Charles Cumming, who had preceded her, Ness, as supervisor of the Art Salon and who had an art school in Des Moines and a teaching position at the University of Iowa. Ness also elevated the profile of the Art Salon by implementing cash prizes for winning entries and inviting notable members of the arts community from across the country to serve as jurors. Rene de Harnoncourt, for example, who you see here, was the reigning judge in 1933. He was the assistant director of the American Federation of Arts and host of a national radio program called Art in America, which had been conceived by the General Federation of Women's Clubs and sponsored by the AFA and the Museum of Modern Art. De Harnoncourt reported to the American Magazine of Art that the paintings at the Iowa Fair showed what he called a very strong individuality that was directly reflective of the locality. Zenobia Ness brought all of these experiences and more into the development of art at the Iowa State College. Every year after the fair, for example, she arranged for the winning paintings in the art salon to be exhibited at the Memorial Union on campus, and the works were sometimes purchased for the Iowa State collection. The exhibitions were also accompanied by a celebratory artist dinner in the Great Hall that included the visiting jurors, the artists, campus dignitaries, and other cultural leaders from throughout the state, and these occasions were among the highlights of the Iowa art scene for years. There you can see one of the very few photographs that I've been able to find on the exhibitions there at the Memorial Union, but I also, before I go on, would like to recommend a YouTube video by Paul Jewell on the Iowa Arts Fair and Salon, the Iowa State Fair Art Salon. And I believe Paul is here with us today. So thank you, Paul, for your good work on that subject. Before I go on as well, I just want to note a couple of things that are in the exhibition that were in fact prize-winning paintings from the Iowa State Fair. So we know that Zenobia Ness, in a way, kind of sanctioned these in a approving sort of way. Here is one that was not purchased for the Iowa State collection on campus, but rather belongs to the Cedar Rapids Community School District collection. But here you see Zenobia Ness, with it Marvin Cohn's River Bend. And Marvin Cohn was a longtime artist in Cedar Rapids, taught at Coe College, and was a lifelong friend of Grant Wood's. Lowell Hauser's Village Fountain in Haiti is a very unusual, interesting painting that's in the exhibition. It was the winner of the Sweepstakes Prize in 1937 and purchased by Dean Anson Marston, who donated it. And here you see him, College of Engineering, Dean. And as we'll see, another work coming out by Hauser. He had spent quite a bit of time in Mexico and in Haiti and was quite influenced by the Mexican muralists of the 1920s. And thus we see some of that subject matter here, but it is an unusual subject for the Iowa State Fair. And two, Grant Wood Stone City, which won a prize at the in the oil division in 1930 at the Iowa State Fair, and it was also shown in the same exhibition that same year that American Gothic was shown in at the Art Institute of Chicago when American Gothic was purchased for the Art Institute of Chicago. It was quickly purchased by the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha, and later, in 1941, Zenobia Ness asked if Grant Wood could arrange for it to be lent back to the fair, not for prizes and competition, but simply as an exhibition painting. Zenobia Ness was also the chairman of the art division for both the Iowa Federation of Women's Clubs and the General Federation of Women's Club, which was a cooperative national organization of dozens of women's groups that focused on philanthropic and educational work. Ness and her Iowa counterparts, including Louise Orwig, art librarian at the Des Moines Public Library, who was also an active member of the Federated Clubs, and Joanna Hansen, head of the Home Economics Department and Allied Arts at ISC, all had a hand in exhibitions and art lectures that the clubs sponsored in Iowa, and they collaborated on several other important projects that developed the arts. Notably, Hansen, for example, organized the Allied Art Guild at Iowa State for students and staff and initiated a chapter of Delta Phi Delta Art Society for her department. Ness and Orwig collaborated on a biographical dictionary of Iowa artists, and here you see it along with a painting by Louise Orwig. This book had a foreword by Grant Wood and was published in 1939, and it remains an invaluable resource for Iowa art history. Encouraged also by the General Federated Women's Clubs, which seem to have pioneered the movement, and I find that fascinating, Hansen and Ness also hosted a radio program which seems to have been, on at least some occasions, not unlike Renee de Harnoncourt's Art in America show. Broadcast every weekday from 1926 to 1966 on WOI radio, the Homemakers Half Hour was largely drawn from the expertise in the Home Economics Department at Iowa State College. And while it ranged in content from household hints and menu planning to discussions with guests, including First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, it also included lessons on art, history, and design. Radio was a new medium at the time, and it was increasingly recognized to be a powerful educational tool and a democratizing force as more and more people acquired radios and tuned in. There were several national art radio programs in the 1930s, and they could be listened to for pleasure or used as part of correspondence courses, complete with books and image reproductions that listeners could order in advance. All of these efforts, from Iowa's homegrown version to the national programming orchestrated by coalitions of major museums, were part of the larger interest of the 1930s in bringing culture to the people and developing a culture of the people. The art of the 1930s in the United States was dominated by what is often called social realism, which more broadly meant representations of American life. In that troubled period after the horrors of the First World War, when tensions that would lead to the Second were escalating, and with a devastating economic crisis crippling the country, Americans turned homeward. The federal art programs of the New Deal era emphasized subject matter of what they called the American scene, and they heralded art for the people that could benefit both artists and the public alike. Fittingly, not only were murals directed towards these ideals, but also a good deal of easel painting was as well. including images by artists of the Iowa PWAP and now included in the Iowa State collection. Here, for example, we see Orr Cleveland Fisher's Farmyard, a very typical kind of quintessential American scene painting as we look over this farmstead with the cow, the barn, and the farmhouse beyond. Lawton Patton, his houses, simply a street scene. This is an interesting connection to Iowa State for several reasons. One was Lawton Patton was a professor of landscape architecture at Iowa State. And I recently found an article from the period from the State Historical Society, a little newsletter really, mentioned that they were interested in collecting images, drawings, sketches, paintings of streetscapes and places in Iowa that no longer existed. And Patton had assigned his classes for years to do such drawings of local vernacular architecture. And he submitted a large group of these to the Iowa History Society. So I'm interested in pursuing that just a little bit, but I suspect that this painting by him is exactly the sort of thing that they were talking about in that, and the sort of thing he was asking his students to do. You also see that he was an author of an architectural drawing book. So an interesting connection in different ways to Iowa State. Chris Glazel, also known as Christine, both she and her husband were at Stone City at Anamosa in 1932-33, knew Grant Wood, and Chris was hired for the Iowa PWAP, producing maybe these pictures specifically, but certainly some paintings in the easel division of that project. Velma Ramus, here with chopping wood, a more rural scene, but again, typical of American scene painting of the period. She is also known for her book called Campus Sketches of Iowa State College, which was later updated to include some Iowa State University pictures after the name change. And Dorothea Tomlinson, who was also a member of the Stone City Art Colony in 1932. Here is her Threshing, a really beautiful painting in the Artists of an Era exhibition, and also her post office mural from Hoisington, Kansas on the right, on the lower right. I find all of these interesting in connection, say, to Arthur Rothstein's aerial view of Grundy County farmland, in part because of this aerial view that she presents in her two paintings. If anybody's looking for an interesting book to read on aerial view making in the Midwest, and there are so many photographs of farms taken from the air in the 20th century as airplane travel became possible, I recommend Jason Weems' book. I should have looked up the title, on aerial views of the Midwest. Weems, W-E-E-M-S. The Artists of an Era exhibition also includes 5 lithographs by Grant Wood that were not part of either the Iowa PWAP or directly associated with a commission from Iowa State. Rather, they were part of a commercial venture commissioned by a New York corporation called the Associated American Artists, whose director, Reeves Lewenthal, had begun after becoming discouraged by the falling market for art during the Great Depression, and he conceived of a program to offer prints by notable American artists to the public at modest prices. As Lewenthal explained, he said, fine art should be available to all persons, regardless of wealth, if a healthy democratic national culture is to be permanently founded. He launched the project in 1934. Grant Wood signed up immediately, as did his fellow regionalists, Thomas Hart Benton and John Stuart Curry, and nearly 40 others. But Wood didn't make his first prints until 1937. Artists received a flat fee of $200 for each image, doing the drawing on lithographic stones. By each image, I mean each design. They did drawings on lithographic stones and then shipped those heavy stones to New York, where they were printed by master printers in editions from 100 to 250. Grant Wood did a total of 19 lithographs for the country, including a set of 4 that were hand-colored by his sister and her husband, and that's not who you see here. This is Doris Lee, another artist, friend of Grant Wood's, and her husband, Arnold Blanche, her partner, Arnold Blanche. Anyway, Nan Wood Graham hand-colored these lithographs that Grant Wood designed. This was a way of helping support her during the difficult days of the Depression. The prints were intensively marketed in national newspapers and magazines with headlines such as "Signed Originals by Great Artists for only $5 each," and they were sold through department stores and mail order. In 1935, the Associated American Artists earned a profit of about $50,000, and it went up from there. By 1937, it had sold about 70,000 prints. And the next year, Time magazine reported that the company had made $103,000, claiming that nothing was more thoroughly exploded than the old notion that plain Americans won't buy black and white pictures. One last dimension of the arts initiative at Iowa State College in the New Deal period is its influence on the proliferation of post office murals throughout the state that were part of the federal programs for artists after the PWAP. And here I've provided essentially a sort of chart that shows the breakdown of the federal programs. You can see the one we've been talking about, the PWAP, was very short-lived. Just from essentially December through April 1933-34. That was replaced quickly with what was called the Section of Fine Arts. And then that was sort of overlaid with another one run by the Treasury Department. All of these were for public buildings and images. But the biggest of all of these was the Federal Art Project under the WPA. It had a number of divisions, which included painting, sculpture, and also graphic arts, including posters, commercial design, and original prints. And this is the one that produced the largest number of objects. The murals were done for the post offices under primarily the Section, but also the Treasury Relief Project as well. So most people think of WPA art and they think of post office murals, and indeed, they are certainly the most vivid and, you could say, public of the public art that we still have from this period. Several painters from the Iowa PWAP leveraged their experience with the Ames murals to win commissions for Iowa post offices. And these certainly, as I just mentioned, remain evidence of the period's creativity. 2 preparatory drawings by John Bloom for his murals in DeWitt and Tipton, Iowa, are included in the Artists of an Era exhibition, for example. And here you can see the first of these, the one for DeWitt, Iowa, called Shucking Corn. The brown paper drawing is included in the exhibition currently on view at Iowa State. And there you can see the post office mural that it is preparatory for. And then here is the brown paper drawing for cattle at Tipton, Iowa. He also did a full color study, and there it is on the lower portion of the screen. And there is the mural at Tipton, Iowa, up there on the right. John Bloom had studied art at the Art Institute of Chicago and had attended both sessions of Grant Wood's Stone City Art Colony in 32-33, and he was among Wood's first hires for the Iowa PWAP. Bloom's post office murals share a strong resemblance to the work of both Wood and Christian Petersen in its strong visual design and clarity of execution. Lowell Hauser's work, and we had just seen the village fountain in Haiti a moment ago. Here is his Ames post office mural. Hauser's work is more unusual, as we see in both the watercolor and the post office mural. He had studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, but his interest in the subjects that you see here, Mexican history and Haitian culture, were the result of an extended period he spent in those countries in the late 1920s. Chris Glassell, who we also just glimpsed with her paintings there on the right, was one of several women participants in the Iowa PWAP project, and she also was member of the Stone City Art Colony. Her mural for the Leon, Iowa post office celebrates the receipt of mail directly at a farm, a service known as rural free delivery. And finally, Orr Cleveland Fisher's Corn Parade at Mount Ayr, Iowa, may be my favorite for its delightful portrayal of Iowa's most important crop celebrated at a local parade. And some of the kind of humorous qualities of this mural may be result of the fact that Fisher worked with J. Ding Darling, the Des Moines cartoonist, who, of course, infused his work with humor on many occasions. All of this work was part of the New Deal era's emphasis on art for the American public and its importance to developing culture for the people. Iowa was a leader in that period with aesthetic innovations that were admired and emulated across the country. And as we have seen today, Iowa State College, now Iowa State University, was at the forefront of commissioning some of the most notable works of that movement, implementing a vision for both the college culture and the state as a whole. Today, Iowa State has continued these efforts, and now its art on campus collection includes nearly 2,500 works of public art. As Christian Petersen wrote, "Let your artists and sculptors work. Make them work. It is you who make your artists, and through them you shall be remembered." Iowa State College did just that in the 1930s, leaving a legacy of aesthetic achievement from a time of crisis that should be a model for us all. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joni. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat and we will read them out. And just a reminder, this will get published to our YouTube channel. And so if you missed part of the talk, you'll be able to watch it at a later date. Okay, I don't see any messages popping up, but just a reminder for everyone, we do have a survey link in the chat. And so if you're able to fill that out, that would be absolutely wonderful. We use that data to help determine how we'll market our future events. So we would really appreciate if you took the time to fill that out. Wendy Parker said that was delightful. Joni?
Hi, Wendy. Thank you, Wendy.
But yes, all right. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to Joni for such a wonderful talk.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.